This is Bars at Work, where leadership and personal development meets hip hop. I'm Bajoy Phillip.
And I'm Javen Ferrer. Bars stands for dope lyrics. Every episode, we drop bars about a topic.
Then we break them down for motivation and insights that you can apply in your work.
This is a very difficult time in our culture and in society for a lot of different reasons. And this piece that we're going to get into today, you actually wrote this piece about a year and a half. No, it wasn't that long ago.
Probably earlier last year. Yeah,
Was it last year or was it earlier this year? I don't know.
No, it was last year. It was definitely last year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you wrote this piece last year because this is not a new conversation. This is not a new topic. This piece, Race Together, that you put together is as relevant then as it is now, as it will be a year from now, and maybe even beyond that in all likelihood, unless we as a society decide that this is the moment that we are going to keep the foot on the gas pedal of change and not let up. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode, Race Together.
Let's go. Bars at work. Race together, let's go. What's race when you raised by the same sun rays? Me and Jay, leadership styles, P and J to K. Wanna block my shot? See me fade away, these smarts never fade. I'm hardened with a step back trade. Race, is it just genetic code? Or a social construct to put people in the mold? To stratify blacks from the whites, darks from the lights. They got the alt-right jokers fighting dark nights. The prejudice is found in the metrics. Meritocracy can't exist if I judge you in seconds. You can't change the past, but we can change the present. Race together, make the workplace safe for difference. Yeah, if we race together, we chase what's better. I forecast a good future if we face the weather. But we have to move forward, let our guards lower, let the love show up and face our inner holdups. Yeah, bars at work, advocates for leadership. Keep the dream alive that many died to give. Race together.
Yeah, man.
Race together.
Brother, that joint was powerful when you penned it, but it gives me chills right now.
Yeah,
for real. Man, this is a real heavy one. This is a very heavy one.
It's a heavy one, and I wrote that during a time when I was really studying up and learning more about race and diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and just my mentality already. I mean, being a person of color and being Indian, obviously I have very specific values and beliefs when it comes to racism. Mm-hmm. However, I didn't really study race, as a construct and what it is and the history of race in America and things of that nature. And so that was during the time when my mind was shifting on, man, how systemic and how deep things get when it comes to how we categorize and stratify people, and where did the construct of race even come from, and how are we all interconnected. And so, yeah, it was basically a output of all of that. But yeah, to your point, the relevancy for today, there's a lot packed in that verse that I believe we can learn from in terms of how we approach and how we respond to the events that are occurring right now.
There's been so much violence and injustice that has happened over the lifetime of America. Most recently, Breonna Taylor,
yes,
Ahmaud Arbery, and
yes,
of course George Floyd. That has sparked this culture, this climate of tension, where it's like the conversation now is literally unavoidable.
Right.
And we've had other moments like this, but this is the current moment that we're in, where people are feeling like I have to say something. If they don't, in the business context, their people are talking about it. Mm-hmm. They're talking about it in the workplace, which is a little bit different now because of COVID. People aren't necessarily in the workplace, but they're in chats, but other people are. So we're in the point where we're starting to transition back slowly in different industries, but the conversations are happening. So how businesses respond to it, if they get ahead, not really ahead, but ahead of their company talking about it, and what they facilitate in terms of how people are able to, figure things out, what tone should they have? Like, how is a critical leadership moment right now where leaders set the tone for how those conversations happen and what happens going forward?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a critical leadership moment. And, you know, Bars at Work, we always talk about topics related to leadership, professional development, the workplace. And we could talk about all the nuances from a macro society perspective. We could talk about analyzing the events that occurred, all of those things. But I think what you just said, the leadership moment right now should be analyzed, because I think how we respond in the workplace makes a difference. Like, you cannot take external events and believe that it doesn't impact your employees, your organization in some way.
Yep.
And how you respond to those external things internally makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. And we're seeing that happen, where companies are now at a crossroads of articulating, what is my stance on these issues? What is my stance on racism? What is my stance on the Black community? What is my stance on Black Lives Matter? I don't think people have a choice anymore to be silent. And if you are silent, it's as if you're vocalizing a particular stance, right?
Yep.
So it's a leadership moment, and some companies and organizations are stepping up to bat, and other organizations are still struggling right now to figure out what their voice is on this topic.
Yeah, for sure. So let's break down these bars, man, that you have so much relevance to, again, past, present, and future, especially in the workplace. But, you know, this particular piece definitely deals more socially, more on a humanitarian level, how we relate and engage with each other as human beings, and especially in this black and brown and white context in America. So let's run the beginning piece.
Let's go. Bars at Work. Race together, let's go. What's race when you're raised by the same sun rays? Me and Jay, leadership styles, P and J to K.
Hey, yes. Man, something about that piece right there. I mean, first of all, leadership styles, P and J to K, man. Shouts to the Locks, man. Shouts to D Block. That's roots right there, man.
Yeah.
Influential hip hop leaders, man, and pioneers. Break this piece down, man. What were you saying in this?
I mean, it was a setup, you know, like when we do bars, there's always a setup, set the tone for the whole thing. And the question of what's race at the end of the day when you're raised by the same sun rays. And again, there's double meanings and triple meanings and all of that in that line, where basically I'm saying, let's take to the root of this whole issue and challenge is our perspective of when we categorize and when we see people through the lens of race, right? And then race gets tied to cultural behavior and other things, where you start to see and categorize someone by their color, right? And attribute certain aspects, characteristics, negativity, things like that to them.
Yeah.
And I'm basically asking the question, what's race when we're raised by, but we're all under the same sun. We've all grown up in humanity under the same sun rays. And I believe that we're all growing up under the same rays from the sun, God, right? And it sets up this tone of, like, even our relationship, Jay, of when you and I interact, it's as if we're brothers. We're not looking at each other like, obviously we retain our uniqueness in the sense that I respect that you're Black and Puerto Rican, and I know that you respect that I'm Indian. But at the same token, there's like a level playing field of how we operate together in our relationship together. So I'm just setting that tone
for sure.
Like, at the end of the day, what's race? Me and Jay are raised by the same sun rays, and quite frankly, we're like leadership styles, P and J to K.
I mean, you merge that in there, and it's like, no, who else could do it the way we're doing it because of our experience and where we're at, right? That's facts. That's how we feel. And so when you talk about your background, you being Indian, me being Black Puerto Rican, that's not part of the conversation every time we talk.
Right.
That comes up depending on what we're talking about and what the context is, but we're not constantly thinking about, it's Indian dude. And it's just like, that's not it, right? So when you have relationship with somebody, whether it's a professional relationship, personal relationship, you start really merging your thoughts and ideas, and I would say your soul, and you decide, hey, I'm going to be engaged with this person for these things, and you start to value one another for what you bring to the table, right? My wife said recently, I shared with you about us. She said, hey, you have a lot of dynamics going on, right? And I try to represent that with what's behind me, with all the different things that I am. She said, but if there's 25% of who you are, but Joy is 100% of that 25%. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's why we mesh and we see eye to eye. We can finish each other's sentences in certain contexts. When we talk about vision or different things, this whole brand and what we're building, we see things eye to eye. So you need that type of camaraderie when you talk about leadership and setting the stage for this type of conversation in any endeavor in life.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about race relationships. It's like, yeah, we understand that we're different from that perspective, but it's the classic Venn diagram. I just got business on them, right? So it's like we're bringing a relationship together where there's commonality. There's so much commonality between what we do, and the same could go for like whatever facets I have about my life and my interests and things like that. You overlap with much of it, right? And so but that only comes through relationship. That comes through understanding, and then race becomes less and less of a thing. However, we never discredit, or we never like say, oh, I don't see your background. No, I respect your background, right? And that we've always had that value for each other. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. So it really was a line of appreciation too, man, to you, for our friendship and our brotherhood. So,
salute, my man.
Yeah,
run it.
Wanna block my shot? See me fade away. These smarts never fade. I'm hardened with the step back trade. Race.
Yeah.
So we're getting into it now, right?
Yeah.
You want to block my shot and see me fade away. These smarts never fade. Talk about it.
Yeah. So we all know, and we probably have heard this term, like systemic racism, or the system. And I really do believe that there's a system that's been built over time, economically, in policy, in the laws that have been produced, in leadership. I just go down all the levers. There's a system in place that doesn't want true meritocracy to exist, right? And when I say, you want to block my shot, the you is basically the system. And anybody involved in that system at the end of the day that has certain convictions or beliefs, where you believe that racism and stratification and those types of things are good, for the country. And so I'm basically vocalizing my stance and saying, look, you want to try to block my shot through this system, but these smarts never fade. I'm James Harden with the step back tray, right? So as you try to block,
fade away, and I'm scoring
still. And that's the mentality that I want to encourage in just groups, people, the workplace, of saying, don't let the system get to the point in our minds that it's bigger than what we can conquer. We have to be stealthy. We have to be creative. We have to be innovative. We have to be bold, courageous, to step back and still hit that 3-point shot, right? And that's I'm hopeful for that.
Man, it takes at the same time, it takes a very strong-minded, strong-willed, purpose-filled individual to recognize that and stay the course with that when their life experience has been such that the system is against me, is not for me. And they either have been oppressed, or their family or friends, or they've seen, and whether or not they come from a community where that community is oppressed in general, or if they've just seen it at different points or experienced it. So there's a personal development, personal growth. There's a spiritual context and growth that I think people need to evolve. Their individual selves need to mature, see things differently, ascend to a higher level, to recognize, like, wait a minute, this is bigger than just me or the instance that I just went through. This is a whole system. I need to rise above this system with other individuals that are rising above the system so that I feel that, right? So I can actually hit those 3-point shots in different areas if you try to block me. One person may have success blocking you.
Yeah.
And it may be because of a racial, bigot, racist background and mentality. That could be the case. But if you continually focus on that and you look for that, you're going to keep yourself in a state of oppression. Right. I think people need to be able to mentally rise above that and say, hey, that might be the case, but I'm going to go higher above it while I address that on my way if I feel so led to do it. But it's a mental and a spiritual growth and maturity, I think, that takes that person to be able to make those shots when they've been blocked.
Absolutely. And we've all been there, right? We all, like, being colored, people of color, like, we have experienced that, and there is this idea that, are you going to fight or are you going to flee?
Yeah.
The fight or flight response. And sadly and unfortunately, things have happened so repeatedly over the decades, over generations, that people are exhausted. People are tired. They don't want to have to fight. They don't want to have to play the game. They don't want to have to, make all the moves just to get one step ahead.
Right.
And so I acknowledge that and I empathize with that. But this is just encouragement for us to say, you know what if we had that, like, kind of urgent underdog, let's win grit, that grit mentality, and say, you know what, there's going to be times when we do lose and we're going to face the challenges. But there's other times where the mentality alone will help shift our steps. So
yeah, you talk about fight, right? And so current context, how do you fight, and what is effective, and what, depending on your perspective. So let's talk about protest for a minute in this context, right? So the country is about protest, and the laws allow for us to protest and freedom of speech and all those things. So you talk about peaceful protest is generally accepted. Hey, that's great. Then you have this other thought that's like, well, wait a minute. Does peaceful protest really generate the change that needs to happen? And so when that gets in people's minds, it's like, hey, we've been marching, we've been protesting, we've been doing this, and change has not happened. Black people are still getting killed by police. I don't care how many or how few. One is too many to not be addressed by leadership and by those that are empowered to say this is wrong. So we march, we protest. But if the results are not happening and you're getting to the point where you're fed up with that, you tend to get a little bit more volatile. You tend to get a little bit more angry, a little bit more frustrated. And you're saying, I'm peacefully protesting, but my voice is being ignored because your life is not impacted by this issue. And your social life is not impacted. Your economic life is not impacted. I'm going to impact your economic life by causing disruption in the community and in the business world. So not justifying that at all. Right? Those would hear what I'm saying, and to understand somebody's perspective isn't to justify their behavior or their actions. But I understand how a person can get to that point and say, why am I wasting my time doing this when I need to do something that's going to spark change? Right. You could argue because now businesses are paying attention. One could make the position of, hey, you know what, people are recognizing that this is starting to hit them in the pockets or has the potential to hit them in the pockets. They're now speaking up. I don't know how much one has to do with the other, but the facts are things are shifting and more people are taking note and speaking up in a different way in a business context than they have in the past.
Yeah. So again, really controversial, right? And I'm glad you brought it up because there's so many perspectives to the protests themselves and how we do it. Understanding that mentality is so important. Let's break it down to like having kids, right? I could tell my kids peacefully, no, don't want you to do that. No, don't want you to do that. No, don't want you to do that. But sometimes it takes me taking away something that they have, putting them in timeout, like, right? And there's a different shift in how I'm engaging. So I can understand the mentality, but to your point, do I justify violence to other human beings or you know, vandalism and those things, because also not every protester who's doing those things is doing it for the right reasons.
X.
Right. So I understand the mentality of how the protest can escalate. And to your point, you know, I'm not there yet to justify certain violent acts, especially from those that aren't doing it for the right reason. They're not doing it for those that have been persecuted. They're not doing it for those that have been hurt by the events. You know, they're lashing out and seeing it, and that's not for everybody. But I'm just saying there are, I'm sure, people, because again, we can't judge every mind and heart. It's hard
to delineate, right?
It's hard to delineate. So it's tough. But to your point, at the end of the day, it's making a workplace conversation, right, that is necessary. And I think the bigger level thing that leaders need to be thinking about in this time is not addressing whether or not protests are right or wrong. It's not addressing whether or not, you know, a phone shop or whatever storefront was vandalized. Is that right or wrong? That's not the point. That is not the point to bring up in the workplace right now. Mm-hmm. What's to bring up is the bigger level story of how a specific community, the Black community, feels and is experiencing life, not only today, but over generations. And what are we going to do about that as an organization, and where do we stand on that?
Yes, sir.
And that's the important piece. So
yes, sir. Yeah. That's a good setup for these next couple bars. Let's run it.
Race, is it just genetic code or a social construct to put people in the mold? To stratify blacks from the whites, darks from the lights. They got the alt-right jokers fighting dark nights.
Whew. It's a lot packed in that. Yeah. Tell me about it.
Man.
Tell me about it.
So, yeah. All right. So, race, is it just genetic code or social construct to put people in a mold? The interesting thing is it's both and. So obviously there are physical feature differences that are noticeable when you talk about one race to another, right? And you could talk about physical attributes, abilities. You could just talk about descriptors and dialects, language. I mean, there's some physical things that are obviously different. It's not just genetic code, but it is genetic code. There are genetics there. But when those differences that are noticed by individuals who have whatever interest that they have in their minds that are not collaborative and for everyone, regardless of their differences, when they notice those differences and they're able to create processes, systems, structures, and things that are set up to favor one group versus another group, now you've turned the corner where it is now a social construct that puts people in a mold.
Absolutely. My mindset has been formed by I thought it was transformative for myself. This series, it was an old PBS series called Race, the Power of an Illusion. And it was a documentary series basically getting into where did race come from? What's the history of race in the United States and all of that. And I still remember one of the episodes where this class body of students, like, you know, young, I think middle school or early high school students, they basically took genetic sampling across the class, and the teacher basically had them set up, okay, who do you think your genetic code is going to be most like in the classroom? And naturally it was like the Black person would say to the next Black person, I think I'm going to be more like you. The white person's going to the white person, and the, you know, Hispanic person's going to the Hispanic person. And they were basically judging the results of this genetic test based on the color attributes of, you know, what's in the class, and some of it may have been tied to also cultural attributes. But when they actually got the results back, what they found was the actual genetic, you know, data was basically saying that a completely different story of how they were actually closer to people that didn't look like them genetically, and the actual genetic code that's tied to your skin color, right, is so minuscule and so small compared to the rest of the genetic code that like you're actually more alike to someone who looks different than you may be to someone who actually has the same skin color than you.
Wow.
You know, and
That's a
so
powerful, revelation.
so it's a power. So talking about we're raised by the same sun rays, humanity was born from a certain place and has propagated where the lines of like ethnicity, race, all of these types of things. Yeah, you might have a similar skin tone and live in a similar region, but that doesn't necessarily mean genetically that you can categorize people that cleanly, you know? And so it was just a way to challenge our thinking of like, where did this race thing come from? But to your point, that idea of categorization based on this very minuscule, very specific thing called skin color, as well as, you know, and then that skin color gets attributed to certain cultures and ways of working in a society and things like that. All of a sudden, it becomes a construct that you do voting registration, you do employment, you know, categorization, you do all these different things based on that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the mindset that comes in that starts to categorize and separate is driven by fear.
Right.
Because fear says that person's different than me. They may be able to do this better, or they may realize that they're different and want the most for their people, like versus me. Whatever the fear is, it causes them to create something that says, okay, I have to set this up for myself to win. And this ties into business and negotiations. People that don't believe that there is a win-win where you win and I win, therefore we all win. They don't have that mentality. You have deals and situations set up where it favors one and oppresses the other.
Yeah. And it's a natural piece. It's again the onion on this. It's just keep peeling back the onion.
Just keep going deeper.
Yeah, it's like we're socially, like as humans, we are wired to make categorization a part of how we sustain our livelihood. Right? We basically are wired to they call it homophily. Birds of a feather flock together. Like when you put kids in a room, they typically will gravitate to like, who am I alike with? To have a sense of community, safety, and a sense of belonging. And that just propagates into adulthood as well, where we birds of a feather flock together. And you see that, we saw that at the lunch tables growing up, you know, in high school, we saw that. And that not only can extend to race, but it can extend to, you know, the jocks and the sports people, the band geeks, the mathematicians. I
100%. I share with my daughters. Right, my oldest daughter is going to college this year, and I'm excited for her. Right, and she has great opportunities, and I love what my girls are doing, and so I want them to aim high. I told them I had opportunity when I was in high school. I had great grades. I was being recruited out of Brooklyn for all the great schools in the region, et cetera, including the Ivy League. So I don't even know if we've ever told about this, but Dartmouth was recruiting me because I had an opportunity to go to Dartmouth. And I didn't, because in a city, black kid had maybe two or three white kids on my high school football team. Right? Just talking about aesthetics. And mostly black, Hispanic, couple guys from, you know, Middle Eastern regions and stuff. So, you know, it's New York, right? It's like the melting pot. Dartmouth, when I opened up that book way back then, 20 plus years ago, the only brown faces I saw was an Asian kid. Now I'm like, how's the most brown face going to be an Asian kid when you're not too far from where I'm at? I, in my mind, couldn't conceive of leaving. I'm in the hood, man. I'm in the projects, and my high school team is a certain culture. I couldn't imagine going somewhere where I couldn't even connect with anybody. Like who there would I connect with? Now, in big part, that was because of my upbringing and the lack of exposure that I had. And this ties into other people that have grown up in opposite conditions, rural areas, farm areas, right? Areas out where I'm at in Texas, East Texas, West Texas, that may not have had any black people there. People didn't have any exposure to black people, right? So it wasn't that I didn't want to be around white people. It was that I wasn't sure if they would accept me or if I would fit in or if I was ready to commit the next 4 years of my life to this situation. So because of my context, I decided to go somewhere else, went to the University of Delaware, was more diverse, was closer to where I was at, right? That's where we went. Shouts to UD. And the rest is history. So as I started to get engaged and in community more and more with white people, people from other races, you start to be able to make decisions about the differences and how you see people. But it's that initial exposure, I think, that sometimes for people is produces fear at the onset. For me, it definitely was. And I can understand that for other people, but it's what you choose to do after that moment of realization that makes the difference.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the idea of the group, right? And we I don't know what it is, but we're innately driven to say I'm a part and I affiliate with this group.
Yeah.
And if we're going to break the challenges of race in the workplace and even socially outside of the workplace, we have to start getting okay with being a part of multiple groups and saying I affiliate with actually multiple groups. And here's my connection to these groups. And I'm not going to have so many stringent boundaries around what group I'm a part of. And you'll know that by asking yourself, who do you come in contact with the most? What are your interests? How do you view groups that don't have the same interests as you?
Right.
You start to break those questions down and you'll find where you truly affiliate with and how you view others. And the other evil thing about the way we categorize people and the way we create that stratification is that for us to feel esteem for the group that we most connect with, guess what? We have to almost project negative perception and negativity towards other groups to raise the esteem of the group that we're a part of. And
deep.
you see this happening in the workplace apart from race.
Yeah.
HR can't do anything right. Finance, what is finance doing?
Yep.
It's all
us
of that.
versus them.
Yeah, it's us versus them. Silos is a very business way of basically saying departments and groups are in solidarity with each other, but not truly trying to open up their borders to interact with other groups and functions in the organization.
Yep.
And it's much easier to find your courage and your esteem by saying we're the best, we can't do any wrong, and point blame and issues on every other function and group in the organization. So it happens even at that level.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting when people, cross functions and move to a different group that used to get blamed and just like, okay, well, how do you going to respond to this? Like, well, you going to own something or you going to keep pointing fingers now that you're part of a different group?
Now that you see what's really happening, right? So until we open up our boundaries, and that's like an actual social term of like the boundaries that we set around the philosophical groups that we're a part of, you got to open those boundaries up, and you have to say, you know what, I'm going to affiliate with more than just one group.
Yeah, deep, man. All that just exchange just now was on that one bar, but the other piece of what we just played, it's crazy, man. Just the onion, like you said, we're going deep in this.
Yeah.
To separate the blacks from the whites,
yes,
darks from the lights, that got these alt-right jokers fighting dark knights.
Yeah. Look, even in heavy times, man, I'm glad that bars bring smiles to our faces, because you got to smile too, man. You can't. So the race construct, stratifying blacks from the whites, darks from the lights, basically that stratification system of who's on top, who's on below. And believe me, Indians know about this, coming from in Indian culture, the caste system has been like a evil structure that's been around for hundreds of years, right? And that idea of just being stratified without even cause, and especially when you don't have any control about where you were brought up, where you were born, or what skin color you are,
right?
Those types of things. So I'm just calling out that this construct has really stratified us as a civilization, as a nation, and also in the workplace, you could see this stratification happening. You could see when you look at the statistics across industries, whether it be in pay stratification, whether it be in what roles people can take and what roles they don't take, in leadership pipeline, all of these things, you could see stratification occurring.
Yeah.
And that separation. And then, I call out a little political statement, got these alt-right jokers fighting dark knights.
Yeah.
A lot of double meaning.
That picture in there with that joker clapping and just like, that was the perfect image of a deranged minded individual. Right. And we can get into that without even getting political. Just a deranged individual.
Right.
Who personified by the Joker, who is excited, but making excited motions, but not visually excited is like confusing. Are you excited? Are you like, what are you for? We see that in so many different groups, in so many different contexts. Double talk, right? Are you for me or are you not? Because your actions are doing something different. So what I got from that piece, man, was, alt-right, one perspective, fighting dark knights at the extremes of where we are in the culture and talking about black versus white. You have the concept of these pro-right, alt-right, pro-white, let's say, regardless of what the political label is, against black people. Dark knights. That made me think about like freedom riders from like the 1960s, right? People that were on the front lines of the civil rights movement, and literally dark knights, black and brown knights in shining armor that are fighting valiantly for their people and for what they believe is right and standing up for freedom. Powerful bars, man.
Yeah, man. So much about, it's not to create a violent picture, but there is this opposition kind of feel that comes with racism. It's like, if you don't believe in my stance, I'm going to pummel you. I'm going to fight you. And, politically, this whole alt-right movement of, extreme views on race and political conservatism, structures and stuff like that. At the end of the day, it's a stratification system. It's basically saying it's us versus them. It's a very interesting dynamic. And, just because you're fighting for equality, right? When you're fighting for equality, you also have to embrace people. But I think there's a line being drawn where you have to call racism, and you have to take a stance. I love the fact that our country is a freedom of speech country. I don't know if I would ever want that taken away, but morally and ethically, we have to draw a line where we say, racism, call it what it is. Is it negative or is it positive? And at the end of the day, we're saying it's a evil that's in our society, and we have to call it what it is. And that's, again, another workplace stance that we have to take. It is not. I'm not sure where I stand when it comes to people saying racism is a sensitive topic in organizations. It's not a sensitive topic. It's sensitive to you if you're uncomfortable talking about it. But at the end of the day, it's a very binary situation here. It's either racism is wrong or racism is right.
Right.
What's the gray area when it comes to racism, right? And that's why I don't want to make this about just black against whites, because there's many white people that are absolutely loving. I have people that I consider brothers that are so passionate about equality, justice, and they're interested in other cultures. They're all of that, And so it's not about a race against a race, but it's underneath the race. What is the mentality and heart when we deal with this issue of racism? How we view people, how we act towards them, how we treat them, how we, all of those things. So
that's why I always go back to not necessarily focusing on an individual, right?
Right.
Because in this case, it's hard for people to argue against, in the George Floyd situation, the fact that this brother was murdered, because you have a video, you have video evidence.
Right.
And you can try, but it's very hard to argue against that. It's right there in your face, right? So you can't argue with that. Now, you could say that was one person's potentially racist mindset that produced that. Okay. But then you look at the aftermath. How long does it take for those that are in authority to address that, evidenced by detaining him, charging him, going through this process, and then what will happen as a result of that?
Right.
That's where the conversation shifts into the systemic issue.
Right.
The systemic issue is evidenced by when you have one bad apple that does something that's not right, but they get a pass.
Right.
And when that happens over and over and over, that's why our people are upset and peacefully protesting or not peacefully protesting or whatever it is that they're doing to voice their disgust and disdain. That's why they're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we can dissect all these individual incidents, but you're getting back to that. It's a bigger issue. It's a bigger issue that we have to address, especially in the workplace. Let the judicial system play out, but it is going to tell a story. It will tell a story in this situation. But I think what we can apply to the workplace is, in the same way our words and actions in the moment are important, the follow through and what we do after this week and next week and whatever will make all the difference.
Yep.
We can post what we want. We can Instagram what we want. We can hashtag what we want. But in the workplace environment, it's going to really come down to the day-to-day behaviors, actions, and systemic solutions we put in place that create more equity for those of the Black community. And I truly believe when we start doing that, we also see other communities differently.
Yes, sir.
You know, and so, yeah.
Fantastic setup.
Yeah.
Bars, let's go.
The prejudice is found in the metrics. Meritocracy can't exist if I judge you in seconds.
Man.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into the data of it, right? Now we don't have to necessarily deep dive into stats.
Yeah.
We know the headlines about the stats.
Right.
Right. So the prejudice is found in the metrics.
Yeah.
Like just
people
pick
want
a
to
metric. Pick one.
Yeah.
Right. We can pick
one.
any one and go
Right.
anywhere. Socioeconomic, political, family structure, opportunities, like all of that stuff. Right.
Right.
You could just pick one, which makes the case for, hey, the person that says all of this stuff is not a business decision or discussion is because they haven't been impacted by all those other metrics that I just dropped.
Right. So if you're talking to a business person, like, well, give me the narrative in business form. Like, what's the bit? Well, here are the metrics in companies. You cannot tell me that your leadership pipeline metrics don't show that there's something going on.
Facts.
Payroll, compensation equity, role distribution. Where are your communities of different ethnicities and backgrounds isolated to?
Yep.
So the movement of people within your organization is an important metric. You know, the subtleties of people not having influence and voice. So the daily interaction metric of, you know, who are really influencing ideas, making decisions, doing those types of things.
Yep.
You could go, the list goes on. And this is not to, again, vilify our corporations, but we have to get real with the system that's been put in place and how we all contribute to that system. And it's set up where we have to take a look at it, use the metrics as a way of setting the red flag and saying, like, we got issues, we got problems here.
Yes.
What can we do creatively to undo this mess, you know?
Right,
And
right.
so, yeah, so the idea of meritocracy can't exist if I judge you in seconds. The idea of meritocracy is far away. Like, we have to, you know, undo the system, but we also have to understand that this idea of meritocracy, we all treat everyone has the same chance.
Right. Same opportunities.
The same opportunity is not true. It's
facts,
not true.
Put on paper. Let's if we can put on paper my background versus let's say a white man's background who have, you know, all things being equal, right? And generally speaking, right? Because again, there's a mindset in certain people that's conscious, and then there's a mindset in others that has just been cultivated by society that may not be conscious. It's a subconscious bias that's real, and that could exist in a black person about black people as well as a white person about black people. The Venn diagram shows up again. All things being equal, me versus that person. And you do a survey, you do a poll, and you collect all the large data samples. Most times, 9 times out of 10, or whatever the number is, that person may get the opportunity over me. Why? Don't know. Could be that I show up and my hair looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
And we have maybe we don't have a conversation. Maybe they looked something up online, they see me or something that, but you can't argue with the metrics, because the metrics are the data is out there to show like this is the case.
Yeah, the outcomes are there to say that there's something not happening, or something happening to actually discriminate. And this goes even to like, man, just even the leadership profile structure. Like the idea of leadership in the United States is fundamentally rooted in research and profiling and ideas around how you look, stature, what you wear, what you do, where you come from, how you should look affluent, assert yourself, show dominance. All of these attributes were done by research on leaders that somehow rose to quote unquote leadership or organizational prominence.
Yeah.
Who do you think those profiles were?
Right.
It was us. White males.
It wasn't us. Yeah.
It wasn't us. You weren't looking like, so even in our leadership development stance in organizations, we have to be asking ourselves, do we have to fundamentally challenge the idea of the leadership stereotype? What is it? What makes a leader? Who is a leader? Yeah. And is it someone who looks clean cut and, has an executive presence? What is executive presence?
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
I mean, people have different ideas of that. I can tell you definitely over the last 3+ years that whatever that executive presence was, it's out the window with the current administration in the United States. That is, the landscape is dramatically shifted. So people now are forced to look at what is leadership, what is presence, what is a certain role, what is expectations of a role, and should a person meet those expectations, like based on what the people are putting on them, or does the job require it? Everything is fair game for reassessment at this point to decide how we want to craft this going forward.
It's this idea of the leadership, like what is that presence? It's amazing how you could be intellectually smart, you could have all the degrees in the world, you can actually have the creative ideas and the know-how to take an organization from one place to another and create positive change. But followers' ability to listen to a leader or to take direction from a leader or to at least involve the leader, a lot of followers, team members, employees, things like that, we have to ask ourselves, if I saw Jay and Bejoy on this podcast and they're, comfortable right now, they have facial hair, they have all these things, do I still see them as credible?
Right. Why is that part of the conversation, right? Why should that be?
Like, do I still see them as I'm willing to follow them? Do I still see them as leaders? Like, do I give them the same performance review as a leader than I would any other person that now has the prototypical, like, buttoned up, feel, look, and executive presence? This goes deep. I mean, we see it all the time in the trainings and the things that we do out there.
Right.
It stems from a particular notion that leaders must look, act, feel, and be a certain way. But those molds are based on, a lot of things that I wouldn't say are equally distributed, across races and cultures.
Yeah, there's a passage from wisdom literature that we both subscribe to. You will know them by their fruits.
Right.
And so if you take that idea and you overlay that with leadership, it doesn't matter what a person looks like or what your perception of their appearance is. Look at the fruit, aka
yes.
what they produce, the results in business. Look at what people say about them when they're not around. Look at the conversations and how people view them in high regard. Look at those things, right? Have conversations and interviews about people that work with them. And I'm talking about not people who work just for them because they have a vested interest to give them accolades because their opinions are riding on, right? Their performance is riding on their positive opinions. Look at peers, look at managers, look at bilateral departments and like holistically do a 360 on that individual. Is that a person that I want working in my organization? Are they going to be for my cause and for the change and for like all the things that I want to do, regardless of that they might not look like everybody else in this area?
Yeah.
That's the mindset that people need to have in order to produce the best results for their company.
Absolutely. And you're going to see people now, and in this time I'm seeing articles and things pop up where we're starting to challenge the profile of what a leader is and what the leader looks like and all those types of things, because it is going to be fundamentally different moving forward. And and I'm also a leader and a follower to a degree, right? I have management and leader. I have to ask myself, what do I fundamentally believe around who I attribute leadership to, and interact with? And we have to get real with that, because there's many times one of the discriminating things that happens in organizations is that if you're a minority leader, you're held to a higher standard of like what you need to produce, what you need to do. You have to go above and beyond. And then if you're a non-minority leader, you get a little bit of a pass. You get a little the same standard of performance is not there. And so we have to ask ourselves, when people fail in organizations, are we treating them the same in our response to that failure?
That's good.
When people deliver on projects or not deliver on projects, are we rewarding and dealing in our response in an equitable way?
Right.
And I could probably say qualitatively and quantitatively, there's times where leaders are treated differently in terms of the response to their work. And it's like, okay, you woke up today, great job. And then someone else who's like busting their behind to create change, it's like, well, you got to do more. We want to see a little bit more out of you,
Right.
So
Right.
there's also performance inequities that occur, in organizations. So these are all systemic things that we have to take a look at. But again, where does it start? There's processes, there's policies and all that, but there's heart and mind as well. And we have to look at that.
So we talked a little bit about the past and present. Let's shift gears with these next segment as we start talking about present, where we are, what we can do, what does the future look like. Let's run it.
You can't change the past, but we can change the present. Race together, make the workplace safe for difference.
Yeah.
Race together, make the workplace safe for difference. Can't change the past, but we can change the present. So all this dialogue up until this point has just scratched the surface on a lot of different issues that they're so, in fairness, they are so interconnected and complex and interwoven. It really is like a lattice. Like you pull one piece back, it relates to another piece, and then that relates to another piece, which connects back to the original piece, and then brings up things that you didn't even think of. It takes intentionality and a long range focus and discipline to be able to change something, which is why like we're at this point now with all these protests happening. When a black man is killed by a cop and people protest, makes a little wave, makes a little noise, people get back to their normal lives. Then another thing happens. So you have these ripples, right? You need a sustained momentum and voice that rallies around a cause, regardless of the emotion that might be present, right? When people start to settle on the emotion, it's just like with any loss of a loved one. I lost my mom at a young age. I was 18. That stayed with me hardcore for several weeks, several months. Over the next couple of years in college, it started to fade a little bit as far as the present daily reminder. And then over the course of time, it was different. But what drove me to continue to go into higher levels of success was me remembering the situations, remembering what was put in me, remembering all that stuff. So you have to have a different memory of purpose and a weight that will ground you when the emotions fade. And I think that's what we have to decide right now. The emotions are stirring up all of this conversation, and all this stuff is heated. And we have to decide, yes, what is at the core of this, and what's worth fighting for and continuing to stay together and race together tomorrow as the emotions fade, because they only take you but so far.
I mean, couldn't have said it better than that. I mean, like, that's ultimately, it's not about our emotional response today. It's about the sustained response over time that'll change things, right? That's how it's got to be. And we can't change the past. The past is what has brought us here, and there's a lot of good things in the history of the United States, and there's a lot of evil in the United States, right? And we can say that about every culture around the globe.
Absolutely.
So we can't change those things, but we can change the present on this particular issue of race as we move forward. And what that takes, though, is a level of vulnerability, and it takes a level of introspection. It takes sustained action, over time. And there is that idea of like making the workplace safe for difference. At the end of the day, I think what we're going for and what we're all seeking is that safety, and that psychological safety of being able to process and bring to the workplace our whole selves, our authentic selves, which includes the cultures and the backgrounds we come from, and not having to like hide it, discreetly put it away.
Right.
It's like, let's deal with this. And it's going to take a leadership. This is where leadership skill comes into place. Of when your convictions and your stance has been articulated, now how you open up the space for conversation is really important in these times.
Right.
And being able to facilitate that dialogue with your teams and with your organization is so important.
At the very least, I know in one of my current organizations, it's, the CEO put out a memo. She acknowledged what was happening, right?
Yeah.
George Floyd by name, and got ahead of a lot of the internal discussion and dialogue that may happen. And every culture of companies is different, right?
Right.
You have a company that's very rigid because of the background of the people, right? There's certain place that they come from, whether it's military or whether it's, sports minded, whatever. And so you have to know the heartbeat of your people and what they stand for in general, right? What the common sentiments are, and know, okay, where are those no-fly zones where people and I think she did an excellent job of voicing, hey, this is the facts of where we at. You need to give space and grace for people to be able to heal and talk about these things. We need to be respectful, going back to the company's core values, and we need to be able to give people opportunity, not be insensitive, right? Hear from each other, have dialogue about these things. And here's some company resources if you specifically need to go to the next level in counseling, in dialogue with a professional that's trained to do that. So holistically addressing the issues, but then also giving resources. I think she did a fantastic job of doing that. I know your organization has done something similar. And then there's others that have not even addressed it just yet. So time will tell.
And that's the spectrum of response. And I'm really proud of the organization I'm a part of that not only put out bold statement, but call things as they were. And again, this is not about dissecting each event that has occurred over the past couple of weeks and trying to say what's right, what's wrong, what's indifferent. It's addressing the level at hand of an issue of racism in America, racism in the workplace, the Black community, and how they're treated. And I just applaud my organization's bold stance and the vulnerability to say we're still growing and we're still learning. Because any organization that comes out there as if they've gotten the problem solved, like, come on. Like we said, the prejudice is found in the metrics. Show me your metrics. So it takes vulnerability, it takes empathy, it takes listening, but there's a leadership skill of creating that space. And you mentioned something about values a couple of times, and we talk about authentic leadership and transformative leadership and all these buzzwords. If you don't define for yourself as a leader where your value stands on this topic, I'm not quite sure you can evolve as an authentic leader in today's time. You could say, well, I believe in integrity, I believe in honesty, and I believe in all these things. one fundamental question I would ask any leader who is listening to this or employee, because I also believe our employees are leaders as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is your value and your stance when it comes to race, how you treat people that are different than you, and what you want that relationship to be like in your own personal life?
Mm-hmm.
Get deep with that, because
Mm-hmm.
unless you wrestle with that value in the new world of where things are headed, it will impact how you show up with your teams.
And beyond that, personally, that's fantastic point.
Yeah.
It's not until sometimes where your child brings home somebody of a different race,
right?
Now you forced to confront it.
Got it.
Internally.
Yes, absolutely.
First, right? And you got to reconcile with that. And if you had opportunity to lead people and you've kind of sidestepped this, at some point it's going to literally be at your front door.
Right. Right. There's levels to it. So we laugh about it. It's not a laughing matter, but we in all of this, the Indian culture is coming to a recognition of how much prejudice we have in our culture and towards other cultures and towards other, races. Yeah. And to your point, there's levels. It's like, hey, we could be friends. We can work together.
Associates.
We could be associates.
Business partners even.
Yeah. But when it comes to marriage and when it comes to these things,
it's so final. Now you're getting into the merger of cultures, right?
Right. And so, there's that, right? And, you could get into like cultural similarity and how that's good in relationships and things like that. But ultimately, there are levels of prejudice that occur. And so for a leader to say, okay, how do I look at people who are vastly different than me when it comes to their ideas, having them included on the team, making decisions, but you keep going up the ladder. What do I feel about if someone who is drastically different than me was leading me, was actually now put ahead of me in the quote unquote organizational structure? Does the feeling rise up there where it's like, we were cool as teammates?
Yeah.
But now
I got to report to you. I got to account for my work.
I got to report to you now. And you have different stylistic tastes than me. You have different cultural tastes than me. You don't listen to the same music as me. There's all levels to this. And so if you go up that ladder, I think that's great exercise for authentic leaders to go through and say, where do my values stand? Because until there's a value integration, it's hard to just undo all these systemic things with conviction and with genuine energy, because at some point your value is going to come in conflict with something.
I love that you talk about the values, man. You said a minute ago, where people that say, as a business or as an organization, as leaders, we're still growing. Fair.
Yeah.
But don't use it as an out.
Yes.
That, we're still growing, trying to figure it out. You're growing. Okay. Demonstrate to me that you're growing by the actions that you take.
Absolutely.
Like, give account for what you're learning as you're growing. Give an account for what you're experimenting with, or what you thought, or what you now realize, versus like companies talk about projects, lessons learned. Let's talk lessons learned in this area, right? Of race and racism in the workplace and what you're going through. In a project world, I love how, as a project manager, I would always catch people by like, hey, your program, green, great, yellow, hey, need some attention, red, problem, right? If it's red, that's what gets all the attention. It's like, okay, what are we going to do to get back to green? Okay, right. But if I get to someone and they're telling me, project's green, it's like, everything's great, everything's wonderful. Okay, prove to me you're green.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? Like, it's green and everything's good. Okay, everything's good. Scope, time, cost. Let's run through each one of them. Like, no problems. That issue that we had. Okay, that's done. That's documented. Don't just tell me something is good. Prove it. What is the fruit? Like, how do I know for a fact? And it's not a judgment on your judgment. Yeah. Let's take that out of it. This is about making sure that we as an organization don't have any gaps. Maybe you overlooked something, or maybe something wasn't considered. Let's reason together. Prove to me you're green. So prove to me that you're growing Where were you a week ago? Where were you a month ago? Where were you a year ago? Right. This gets into recent conversation and news that Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, has put out, right? And acknowledging, hey, we had this wrong back in 2016. Now, you could argue the merits or the sincerity of a statement like that. You could, and you will. And people are probably doing it right now and will continue. But the fact is, it was a markedly different, notable statement than was made in the past. That's worth pausing to consider. What is driving that, and what is behind it, and what will be produced going forward. So that's an example of here we're still growing in this, or admitting I'm growing in this. We had it wrong. We're still learning. Okay, that's a good first step. Let's continue it.
Absolutely. It's again, we talked about, it's not just the emotional reaction in the now. It's all the steps, the hard work, and the actions that follow up. And that's so important. So the growth piece is like the still growing. It's like you're not still growing if no action or fruit is being produced.
You're not.
Right.
You're growing weeds.
Yeah.
There's nothing tasty here.
Right. So don't let it die with the post. Don't let it die with the one conversation with the team. People want genuine values to be produced, and the way you see genuine values is through action, right? And so it's just something for every leader. You, in this day and age, you can't say you're being an authentic leader if you don't deal with this issue personally.
Yeah.
So
hey, let's bring this home, man.
Yep.
If we race together, we chase what's better. I forecast a good future if we face the weather. But we have to move forward, let our guards lower, let the love show up, and face our inner holdups. Yeah, bars of work, advocates for leadership. Keep the dream alive that many died to give. Race together.
Powerful, brother. Powerful.
Yeah. We have to move forward, let our guards lower, let the love show up. There's a process to this. And again, we can research, understand racism in America more. We can understand unconscious bias, but there's a point where you have to then say, all right, I got to move forward in this. I have to let my own guard lower, mental guards, emotional guards, the vulnerability to show up. Ask myself, where's my love for other people? Because at the end of the day, there's a heart and mind issue. Jay, if I truly love you as a person and as a neighbor, my actions will follow that, right? And so I think when we talk about leadership, we tend to talk about strategy and innovation, but there's an aspect to authentic leadership that's about how you view the brother and sister next to you.
That's right. Humanity.
Yeah.
Guards, let our guards lower. Bars, let our physical and hired forces, police forces, military forces, let those guards lower.
Lower.
So many shows over this last week of police in different cities taking their batons out, putting it aside, captain saying, take your baton out, put it aside. We're going to walk in the midst of this protest situation and have a dialogue, even if it's a demonstration, right? And this is where people want everything in one moment. You got to take the small wins or the small pluses.
Celebrate the wins, yeah.
Right? Celebrate the plus in the moment, right? Even if it was for show and for all of that, whatever. Hey, it makes a great sound bite or sound clip. That's a plus. Grab that. You come into the situation, you let your guard lower, and you say, look, I hear you, right? We're going to take a knee with you in this moment, right? There's little signs of that. And in a place where we are in a stressful, tension, angry place of potential change, it's always some good stories or some underlining positive things that are happening that get overshadowed, like in the midst of what's going on. Yes, everything that has happened is tragic. Things that are happening right now, tragic. But you're seeing these little sparks of change that are happening, right? The reactions that's going on. So I love that piece, man. It's mental, it's a spiritual guard, right? Because now you get into one area we haven't talked about was in spiritual areas and places of faith, whether it's churches or wherever. People have this worldview, or they have this this church view right? Or this faith view based on whatever their background is that says this is right, and I'm going to compare this versus that, and that's wrong. So I'm going to condemn that as wrong, but without considering themselves as an individual in the context of that whole dialogue.
Right.
And that's where you get these walls that are put up that people are like, hey, you know, this versus that, and it's us versus them. You have to pull that down and look and read whatever your ancient text that you subscribe to as belief. Look at the context of that. Look at yourself in that context and in the current context of life in America in 2020 and beyond, and make decisions that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, it's totally true. And in that line, when I say, you know, let your guards lower, let the love show up, all of that, I want to apply this to those that feel discriminated against as well. Because I think you have to be forgiving, show grace if you want the response too from those that are learning and growing in their view of other cultures and races. So I believe it's for everybody to apply that principle. It's not just those that are struggling with their viewpoints on racism, but it's really also for those that are have their convictions about how racism is wrong, but are vocally out there and trying to create change. You also have to let your guard lower. You have to, you know, show love towards those that are growing. And, you know, I think that's the only way it'll work. So
there's one specific piece that, as we wrap up, we gotta address, because this is big in mental, in the mental space in different professional areas, especially when you talk about majority white areas, right? And that is this concept of tired of hearing about Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. This is not a new conversation. This has been, Black Lives Matter has been out for multiple years now. So to those people, I would say if they wanted an understanding, if you want an understanding, you can get an understanding. But because it's been out, I think what happens is people have decided in their mind early on what they feel about that. And are not revisiting it. This goes back to, hey, I'm still growing. A lot of people are not still growing in that concept and understanding the greater picture and issue, because they've already decided within themselves what that means and decided that, well, no, all lives matter. And it's like,
no,
yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But that's not the issue now. If my neighbor's house is on fire and someone calls the cops and the police to put the fire out, I'm not going to say, well, they didn't come to my house.
Right.
Your house is not burning.
Right.
They need the attention in the water right now. Yes.
It's so
all our houses and our block matters. Our street is important. But if I allow that house to burn down, depending on the proximity of that house, because it is on my block, it's going to impact my house either immediately, because a flame is going to come over here and the amber is going to catch my house on fire, or the property value is going to go down and decrease the value of everything on the block. You cannot tell me that all lives matter if Black lives do not look like they matter and is not getting the attention that it needs. All lives can't matter. It's simple math. It's a Venn diagram. It's a picture. We can show it so many different ways. But that has to be addressed. And that is the sentiment of a lot of people when this conversation comes up, because again, sensitivity, they're not comfortable with it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to acknowledge or address it or see their part.
Yeah, no, that's another one of those leadership sentiments that you have to get, you know, personally reflective on and figure out, where do I stand on this whole idea of Black Lives Matter? And sadly, we're honing in on a sentence.
Come on, talk about that.
We're honing in on a sign and a sentence and a slogan that says Black Lives Matter. And we felt the need to all of a sudden create another sentence to oppose that viewpoint. It's like we're getting caught up in semantics and we're losing sight of the bigger picture. It's like using your house and on fire analogy. The neighborhood is there, the house is on fire, and it's like the firefighters coming in and saying, well, all houses matter, so we got to set up a better water system across the neighborhood. So let's set up the water pipelines and get the you know, the right system in place to protect all of the houses in the neighborhood while this house is like burning down to the ground with kids and family inside of it. And they're talking about, do we have the budget to make sure that we have the right system in place? And by the way, we probably need more firefighters in this community to make sure that we can keep this neighborhood safe.
Yep. That's exactly
Like,
right.
it's like, no, Black Lives Matter as a statement is not saying that all lives don't matter. What it's saying is, in this moment, in this time, and what needs addressing is the fact that Black lives are not treated the same way. Let's address that. Okay. So yeah, I think we've put so much on the slogan of the rallying cry, and to oppose that with this idea of, well, all lives matter. Look, we get that. We totally understand that. But right now, the house that is burning, you know, is the fact that we need to address our view on the Black community.
That's right. It's the
Yeah.
sense of urgency. If it was your house on fire, you would
Right.
have a different sense of urgency.
Yeah.
So it's a perception thing of, it's not my house on fire. Okay. But using the analogy, it's a house that's on my block. Okay. But even if it's not a house that's on my block, there are humans in that house.
Right.
And I'm concerned about that. If it's something that I can do, I'm going to do it. Right. So it's broadening my understanding of my imprint and influence in the world, and my little piece that I can play. If everybody plays their little piece and comes together, we will race together and change everything. Hey,
Yeah.
B, publicly, I gotta say, man, I love you.
Yeah.
You're my brother. We
Love
go
you too,
way
man.
back, man. We've had a lot of, I don't know if it was blood,
Yeah.
but a lot of sweat and tears
Yeah.
over the years. but it's an honor, man, to be in relationship with you, to
Yeah.
have these dialogues, man, that people can listen in on and see the experiences of two guys that come from different walks of life that have been able to come together and race together. We don't have the white representation here,
Yeah.
but we have different representations here, and we have different experiences, and hopefully our dialogue and exchange can be an example for others to consider what they're doing in the workplace, to consider what their response has been, what their lack of response has been, and what is the small part that
Yeah.
they can play in order to help our society start to race together in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love you, brother. And important topic. And I can't stress enough how Bars at Work, you know, we embrace all cultures, races, all those things, and let's address
Absolutely.
the root of the issue, which is a heart and mind issue.
Absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Bars at Work. Tell a friend, tell a coworker, share with your network that there's something new and fresh in the personal and professional development space. Bars at Work, lyrical thought leadership.
B&J, leadership styles, P&J to K.